Hi, the SI meteorologist Paul Dorian here on Thursday, October 25th. Well, we're still looking at a possible amazing weather event in the mid-Atlantic or northeastern part of the country early next week. We have Hurricane Sandy, which strengthened overnight into a strong Category 2 hurricane. It has just crossed the eastern portion of Cuba and now is pretty much out over the open waters on the north side of Cuba, headed towards the Bahamas. That'll continue to churn to the north over the next few days and then turn to the northeast before it looks like it'll then back in towards the mid-Atlantic or northeast coast early next week. At the same time, Arctic air is plunging into the center part of the country. It's snowing right now in Denver, Colorado with 25 degrees, the latest reading, and that cold air is pressing to the east, and the combination of that deep upper level trough with the associated cold air and the hurricane, or at least the remains of the hurricane, will interact here in the mid-Atlantic or northeastern U.S. early next week, and the results could be quite amazing. Well, a couple of weeks ago on October 10th, we put out a story about how there's often a secondary max in terms of tropical systems in October, and here is that max on this particular chart seen right here. And again, we are right about this time frame right here, October 25th, and there are a couple of meteorological reasons for this. One is the abundance of strong high pressure systems this time of the year that move off the east coast. Sometimes that aids in the spin necessary to set off some tropical wave development. Also, you get frontal systems that can drive all the way down to the southeastern part of the country this time of the year as opposed to a couple of months ago, and that can sometimes lead to an area of thunderstorms that eventually can turn into a tropical storm. Neither of which really seem to play a role in this particular scenario here. This is just a tropical wave moved over some very warm Caribbean sea surface temperatures for this time of the year. So again, we're seeing not too unusual to see a secondary max this time of the year. In fact, Sandy is not the only tropical storm. There actually is another one right now, Tropical Storm Tony, but that is not of concern. Sandy is the main concern right now. Well, speaking of Sandy, here's the latest infrared satellite image right here. Sandy is located, again, it just cleared the island of Cuba, and it has a tremendous outflow area right here, kind of a very healthy looking storm with inflow here on the southeast side of it. Continues to move to the north, and it is currently sustained winds at 105 miles per hour, a strong Category 2. Meanwhile, out here is Tropical Storm Tony moving away. No concerns from Tony, but again, it's pretty active. A couple of different systems. This one is, of course, the main concern for the mid-Atlantic and northeast coast. Well, here's a satellite loop of colorized infrared images from the Penn State EWAL site, and you can see an eye actually did try to form, and then it moved over Cuba, and it did appear to weaken a slight bit as it moved over the eastern side of Cuba. However, the important point here is that it has survived, and it still remains a hurricane status. It is now pretty much out over the open waters, headed toward the Bahama Islands right now. So again, the latest reading is 105 mile per hour sustained winds with a north movement about 18 miles per hour, and it'll continue on that track for the next several hours. Well, before we jump ahead and take a look at a couple different forecast maps early next week, let's take a look at the current situation. This is the 500 millibar map as it stands right now. Just want to point out the other main player here. Of course, we have Hurricane Sandy down in the tropics, and here is the deep upper level trough just plunging into the country here, and a lot of cold air associated with it. Again, right now it's 25 degrees in Denver, Colorado, with some light snow falling. This will be a main player as it continues to barrel towards the east coast, and once it gets in this position right here later in the weekend and early part of next week, it'll tend to pull in this tropical storm into either the mid-Atlantic coast or perhaps farther to the north up along New York or Long Island or New England on the early part of next week, probably Monday night time frame. And here's the latest surface map. Again, the strong cold front cutting through the middle part of the country right now, snowing in Denver, cold air pouring in. All of this will play a role. We'll basically have a hurricane pulling up from the tropics and Arctic air plunging into the northeastern part of the country, and the interaction of the two will cause a potential historic event early next week in the Mid-Atlantic and northeastern part of the country. Well, let's now take a look at a couple of the model runs here. We have still some disagreement between the U.S. main model, the GFS, and what I'm showing here is the actual forecast track from last night's 0Z GFS model run, and it is quite different than the European model, which we'll show in a moment or two. This is the entire length of the last night's GFS model run that goes all the way out to the middle part of next week. You can see it moves Sandy out to the northeast, and then it starts to pull it in, but not until it's way up north over Maine. So it's quite different than the European model, which slams this storm right into the Mid-Atlantic region. We'll show that in a moment or two. So there's still some discrepancies between the models, and we'll see if there's any kind of a convergence later on today or tomorrow, perhaps not even until the weekend. We've talked about several times here at the SIweather.com that the GFS model has some difficulty sometimes with coastal storms, especially in the wintertime, that it might have a southeast bias, for example. In fact, a couple of days ago, it had this storm going completely out to sea. Now it's coming more in line with the European model and some other models in that it does phase in that storm with that cold air intrusion by the early part of next week. The main question right now is exactly where does this get pulled in? Is it along the Mid-Atlantic coast, or is it up the coast over Long Island, or even up over New England, as the GFS is indicating right here? Well, I thought I'd show a couple of maps of the European model. This is from a website, RaleighWeather.com, and this is for Sunday evening. The European model at this time has a tremendous storm sitting off the North Carolina coast, or well off the North Carolina coast at this time. Again, this is Sunday evening, and meanwhile the blues here represent cold air now pouring into the Ohio Valley at this time, Sunday night, and it's very cold up here in south central Canada. This is associated with that deep upper level trough as it continues to head towards the east coast. This is the Sunday night European forecast. Let's now jump ahead to Monday night. And here's the very latest last night's 0Z European model run, a very reliable model at the medium range. This is the forecast for Monday evening, and this is just a devastating scenario for the Mid-Atlantic region, places like New Jersey and the Delmarva Peninsula, Philadelphia region here. This particular model run, and it's been consistent, pulls that storm, which 24 hours earlier was about in this region right here, well off the North Carolina coast. It pulls it in right into the Delaware Bay region. This is a potential terrible situation for this Mid-Atlantic region. There could be a storm surge into the Delaware Bay. At the same time, heavy rain is piling up in the Delaware River and coming southward, as the European model is indicating here, a 958 millibar low slamming into the Mid-Atlantic region on Monday evening. 958 millibars translates to about 28.27 inches. Take a look at your barometer at home and see how low that is. This would be perhaps a historic event if this holds true. Now again, we just showed the GFS model tends to pull it in way up farther to the north in Maine and then kind of wraps it around towards New England. So there certainly are still some questions to be answered. The scary part about this, the European model has been very consistent with this particular scenario, whereas the GFS model, of course, earlier in the week had an out-to-sea solution. Now it's tending to be more like the European model in that it is, in fact, pulling the storm in, but farther to the north. So one of the main questions that remains is exactly where this will come ashore at this point. And meanwhile, cold air just pours in here. This particular model scenario would actually dump not only some snow, but probably on the order of 2 feet of snow in places like western Pennsylvania and West Virginia with strong winds to boot. So this is an unbelievable scenario if it holds true. And of course, we'll continue to monitor the situation over the next several days here at the SIweather.com. That's it for now. I'm the SI meteorologist, Paul Dorian.